I was 31 years old when I realized that my marriage had been built on the same kind of silence that raised me. The kind of silence that smells like old fabric and lemon cleaner. The kind that lives in narrow hallways, in bedrooms where the windows never quite open all the way, in kitchens where women move quietly even when no one has told them to. The kind that teaches you, from childhood, that some things are better felt alone. I had returned to my mother's house in Baltimore for the first time in 8 years on a Thursday afternoon that felt heavier than it should have. The sky was gray without rain, the air thick, pressing against my skin like a held breath. I told myself I was only there for the weekend. I told my husband it was just to check on my mother. I told myself I was still in control of my life. But my body knew better. The house stood exactly where it always had, squeezed between two others that looked newer only because someone had bothered to paint them. The siding on my mother's place had faded into a dull, tired beige. The porch steps creaked the same way they did when I was a teenager sneaking back inside after midnight. Even the front door still carried the faint scratch marks from our old dog, the one my mother gave away without explanation when I was 16. I paused before knocking, my fingers hovering in the air. That hesitation felt familiar. Too familiar. Inside that house lived my mother, Ruth. A woman who raised 2 daughters alone and never once admitted loneliness. A woman whose love came wrapped in duty and expectation, not warmth. A woman who taught me early that survival mattered more than comfort. Inside that house also lived my sister, Naomi. 2 years younger than me. Always watching. Always listening. Always knowing more than she said. I had not planned to see either of them again this closely. Not after everything. Not after I built a life that felt safer because it was quieter. But then my husband started acting like a stranger. It began 3 months earlier, subtly, the way Rod always does. Late nights that didn't smell like work. A phone that never left his hand. A distance in his body that felt deliberate. I told myself marriage had seasons. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself lies because they were easier than listening to the unease growing in my chest. When I finally knocked, the door opened almost immediately, as if someone had been waiting behind it. My mother stood there, smaller than I remembered but sharper somehow. Her hair was pulled back tightly, gray at the temples she never colored. Her eyes scanned my face before softening just enough to acknowledge me. She said my name the way she always had, like a fact rather than a feeling. I stepped inside, and the house swallowed me whole. The smell hit first. Old furniture. Coffee that had been sitting too long. The faint sweetness of lavender sachets tucked into drawers decades ago. My chest tightened with memories I didn't ask for. The living room looked untouched by time. Same couch. Same crocheted throws. Same framed photos on the wall that stopped at my high school graduation, as if nothing worth documenting had happened since. My suitcase sat heavy in my hand, unnecessary for a weekend, but I hadn't known how long I would need to stay. Or whether I would want an excuse to leave quickly. My mother took my bag without asking and told me my room was ready. Not our room. My room. The one I left behind when I moved out at 23 and married a man she never quite trusted. Naomi appeared in the hallway then, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed loosely. She looked older than I remembered, more composed. Her eyes lingered on me a second too long before she smiled. That smile unsettled me more than if she hadn't smiled at all. She told me I looked tired. I told her I was just driving too long. Neither of us believed me. Upstairs, my childhood bedroom waited like a preserved wound. Same narrow bed. Same dresser with the loose handle. Same window that faced the neighbor's brick wall. The air felt stale, as if it had been holding on to me all these years. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle into my bones. I thought about my husband then. Marcus. The way his voice had flattened lately. The way his eyes avoided mine. The way he had kissed my cheek that morning without meeting my gaze. I thought about how easily I had accepted it. Downstairs, I could hear my mother moving through the kitchen, her footsteps measured, controlled. Naomi's voice drifted occasionally, low and careful. I stayed upstairs longer than necessary, staring at the walls like they might confess something if I looked hard enough. Dinner that night was quiet in the way that only families with too much history can manage. Plates clinked softly. My mother asked about work in a general way. Naomi mentioned something about her job without details. No one asked about my marriage directly, but I felt the question sitting between us, heavy and unspoken. I watched my sister closely. The way she held her fork. The way she avoided my eyes when certain topics brushed too close. There was something restrained about her movements, like she was guarding herself. After dinner, my mother went to bed early, as she always did. Naomi and I remained in the living room, the television murmuring in the background without either of us really watching it. She asked if I was happy. The question landed harder than it should have. I told her I was fine. Married life had its challenges. Nothing dramatic. She nodded slowly, as if filing that information away. Later that night, lying in my old bed, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked softly around me, settling into itself. I listened to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Marcus's name lit up the screen. A text message. Short. Distant. He told me he hoped I arrived safely. He said work was busy. He said he missed me. I stared at the screen, waiting for my body to react. It didn't. That scared me more than anger would have. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Naomi moving around downstairs early. When I joined her in the kitchen, she was already dressed, her hair neatly styled, her expression guarded. She poured coffee without asking how I took it, remembering anyway. We sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight slicing through the blinds in narrow lines. Dust particles floated in the air like tiny witnesses. She asked if Marcus was coming later in the weekend. The question felt too casual. I told her no. He had work. Important deadlines. Her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. That was the first crack. Later that afternoon, while my mother was out running errands, Naomi and I found ourselves alone in the house. The silence between us felt heavier without our mother's presence, less structured. She asked me if I trusted my husband. I laughed softly, reflexively, the way people do when they don't want to answer honestly. I said trust was something you chose every day. She watched me carefully, her eyes darkening with something I couldn't name. She told me sometimes people chose wrong. Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. I asked her what she meant. She said nothing. Just shrugged. Changed the subject. That night, I dreamed of closed doors. Hallways that stretched endlessly. Voices calling my name without faces attached. I woke before dawn, heart racing, throat tight. As the weekend unfolded, the unease grew. Small things piled up. Naomi's phone lighting up late at night. My mother watching us both with quiet intensity. The way my sister flinched when my husband's name came up, just slightly. On Sunday evening, I overheard Naomi on the phone in the backyard. Her voice was low, urgent. I caught fragments. Not enough to understand. Enough to feel excluded. When she noticed me watching through the kitchen window, she ended the call abruptly. That night, lying awake again, I checked my phone and saw that Marcus hadn't replied to my last message. Hours had passed. I opened our shared location app, something we'd installed years ago out of convenience. His location was turned off. My chest tightened. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself this was my past speaking, my upbringing teaching me to expect betrayal. But deep down, something was already shifting. The house felt smaller. The walls felt closer. The silence felt intentional. I didn't know yet that this place, this family, held the key to a truth that would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the cost of pretending not to see. I didn't know yet that my husband's secrets were already entangled with my blood. And I didn't know yet that by coming home, I had stepped back into a story that never really ended. By Monday morning, the house had begun to feel like it was watching me. Not in a supernatural way. Nothing dramatic or unreal. Just the quiet awareness that comes when you realize you are the only one who doesn't know what everyone else already does. I noticed it in the way my mother studied my face while pretending to read the newspaper. In the way Naomi paused before answering simple questions. In the way the air seemed heavier whenever my husband's name drifted into the room. I stayed longer than planned. Told Marcus I needed to help my mother with a few things. He replied hours later, apologetic, distant, saying he understood. The words felt hollow, like something copied and pasted from habit rather than emotion. That night, I watched Naomi from the corner of my eye as we folded laundry together in the living room. It was something we used to do as girls, sitting on the floor, knees touching, the television murmuring nonsense in the background. Back then, it felt intimate. Now, it felt strategic. Her movements were precise. Controlled. She folded each shirt the same way, smoothing the fabric as if creases mattered more than honesty. I asked her if she was seeing anyone. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. She said not really. Nothing serious. Her voice carried a flatness that didn't match the faint flush on her cheeks. I nodded, pretending not to notice. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Soft. Careful. The kind that didn't want to be heard. My door was cracked open, just slightly, enough to let the hall light spill across the floor. I lay still, breath shallow, listening. Naomi's door opened. Closed again. The front door creaked faintly a few minutes later. I checked the clock. Just after 2 a.m. I told myself she was an adult. She didn't need to explain her movements to anyone. I told myself curiosity was dangerous. But curiosity had already taken root. The next day, I followed her. Not immediately. Not obviously. I waited until she left the house mid-afternoon, dressed more carefully than necessary for a simple errand. I told my mother I was going for a walk. Grabbed my keys. Kept my distance. She drove toward downtown, not to work, not to any place I recognized. I stayed far enough back to avoid suspicion, close enough to keep her in sight. My hand shook on the steering wheel, adrenaline buzzing through my veins. She pulled into the parking lot of a small, aging motel on the edge of the city. The kind of place people didn't choose unless they wanted anonymity. Peeling paint. Flickering sign. Curtains permanently drawn. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I parked across the street and waited, my stomach twisting with guilt and dread. Naomi stepped out of her car and walked toward one of the ground floor rooms without hesitation. She knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. A man stepped into the doorway. I didn't see his face clearly. Just his build. Familiar. Broad shoulders. The way he leaned casually against the doorframe, as if this place belonged to him. My breath caught painfully in my throat. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her. I sat frozen, staring at the blank, beige door like it might burn through my retinas. My chest felt too tight. My palms slick with sweat. I told myself it couldn't be what I thought. I told myself I was projecting my own fears onto an innocent situation. But my body knew better. I drove away before I could talk myself into something irreversible. That evening, Marcus finally called. His voice sounded strange. Too controlled. Too careful. He asked about my day. I answered vaguely. He told me work had been overwhelming. He said he missed me. I listened for warmth. For guilt. For something human. When I asked where he was calling from, he hesitated. He told me the office. I stared at the motel keycard I had found in Naomi's car earlier that afternoon, slipped between the seats like it wanted to be discovered. The number matched the room I'd seen her enter. I didn't accuse him. Not yet. I told him I was tired. That I loved him. That we would talk soon. He agreed too quickly. After the call ended, I sat alone in the darkened living room, the glow from the streetlight casting long shadows across the walls. The house felt complicit. Like it had always known this moment would come. The next morning, my mother asked if everything was okay with my husband. Her voice was too calm. Too neutral. I told her we were just busy. Adjusting. She nodded slowly, lips pressed together. She told me marriage required sacrifice. That sometimes women had to endure more than they expected. Her words landed like a warning. Later that day, Naomi and I ended up in the kitchen together again. She leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely, eyes flicking toward the doorway as if expecting someone else to appear. I asked her directly if she was lying to me. She looked startled. Then defensive. Then resigned. She asked me what I meant. I told her I saw her at the motel. The color drained from her face. She didn't deny it. She asked me not to make this harder than it already was. She told me things were complicated. That it wasn't what I thought. I told her it looked exactly like what I thought. She swallowed hard, eyes glistening. She said she never meant to hurt me. That she didn't plan for it to happen this way. That it had started before she understood what it was becoming. I felt something inside me fracture quietly. I asked her who he was. She closed her eyes briefly, like she was bracing for impact. She said his name. Marcus. The room seemed to tilt. The walls closing in, the air suddenly too thin. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears. I asked her how long. She told me months. Almost a year. She told me it started when he reached out to her online. Said he wanted to check on family while I was busy with work. Said it felt harmless at first. Familiar. Comforting. She told me one thing led to another. That he said our marriage was struggling. That he felt unseen. That she understood him in ways I didn't anymore. Each word cut deeper than the last. I asked her how she could do this to me. She cried then. Quietly. She said she loved me. That she hated herself for this. That she didn't know how to stop. I told her to stop seeing him. She didn't answer. That silence told me everything. That night, I packed my things. Not to leave the house. Not yet. Just to feel like I still had choices. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes looked older. Harder. Like someone who had just stepped out of innocence without warning. I thought the betrayal was complete. I was wrong. Because there was still one truth buried beneath all of this. One secret my mother had been guarding for decades. One detail that would turn this pain into something far more complicated. And I would learn it soon. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my childhood bed with my suitcase half-packed on the floor, listening to the house breathe around me. Every sound felt amplified. The refrigerator humming downstairs. The faint tick of the hallway clock. Naomi shifting in her room, restless. I stared at the ceiling and replayed everything I thought I knew. My marriage. My sister. My mother. By morning, something inside me had hardened. Not anger exactly. Something colder. More deliberate. At breakfast, my mother watched me carefully as she stirred her coffee. Naomi barely touched her food. The tension sat thick between us, unspoken but undeniable. I told my mother I knew. She didn't ask what I meant. She simply closed her eyes for a long moment, as if she had been preparing for this conversation longer than I had been alive. She told Naomi to leave the room. My sister hesitated, looking at me with fear and something else I couldn't quite place. Then she stood, pushed her chair in quietly, and disappeared down the hallway. The silence that followed felt ceremonial. My mother sat across from me, her hands folded neatly on the table. I noticed then how steady they were. No shaking. No nervous fidgeting. A woman who had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times. She told me there were things about our family that had never been safe to say out loud. She told me she had tried to protect us in the only way she knew how. I asked her, protect us from what? She took a slow breath and told me about the summer I turned 11. The summer she started working double shifts. The summer Naomi and I spent more time alone than usual. The summer a man from church began coming around more often. She told me she had been young when she married my father. That she hadn't known herself yet. That love, to her, had always felt like endurance rather than joy. She told me my father wasn't the man I remembered. She told me he had crossed boundaries that should never be crossed. That when she found out, it was already too late to pretend everything was fine. She told me she left him to save us. That she changed cities. Churches. Names. That she buried the truth because she believed silence would keep us intact. My chest burned as I listened. Memories I hadn't touched in years stirred uncomfortably. Gaps. Blurred edges. Feelings I had never known how to name. I asked her why she was telling me this now. She looked at me with something like regret. She said because the pattern was repeating. She told me she saw the same confusion in Naomi's eyes that she once saw in her own. That she saw the same hunger for validation. The same inability to recognize danger when it came wrapped in familiarity. She told me Marcus reminded her of my father. That comparison landed like a slap. I told her she was wrong. That my husband was many things, but not that. She didn't argue. She asked me if I had ever wondered why Naomi and I had been raised so differently. Why she had been more protective of one of us. Why she had pushed one of us to be independent sooner. I knew the answer before she said it. She told me Naomi had been more vulnerable. More impressionable. That she had tried to shield her from everything sharp. She told me she had failed. I sat there, stunned, the weight of her confession pressing down on me. It explained too much. The silence. The rules. The distance. The way love in our house always felt conditional. I asked her if she thought Marcus knew. She said she didn't know. But she suspected he sensed the fracture in Naomi. The need. The openness. She said predators often did. The word made me flinch. That afternoon, I confronted Naomi again. Not with rage this time. With something closer to grief. I told her what our mother had told me. Her face crumpled. She told me she had always felt something was wrong with her. That she carried a shame she couldn't trace. That being wanted by Marcus made her feel whole in a way nothing else ever had. She told me she knew it was wrong. That she hated herself for it. That she didn't know how to stop needing him. I told her needing someone who destroyed her wasn't love. She cried harder then. The kind of crying that comes from years of restraint breaking all at once. That evening, Marcus showed up at the house. Unannounced. Seeing him standing on that porch felt surreal. The place where my identity had been shaped, now invaded by the man unraveling it. He looked tired. Nervous. His eyes flicked between me and Naomi, calculating. My mother stood behind me, silent but present. He told me we needed to talk. I told him we already were. He tried to explain. To minimize. To frame it as mutual weakness. He said my absence created space. That Naomi understood him. That it wasn't planned. I asked him if he knew. He hesitated. That was enough. I asked him if he knew about our father. He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped briefly. He knew. He told me he hadn't known at first. That Naomi had told him fragments. That he thought he could be different. That he thought he could help her heal. The arrogance of it made my hands shake. I told him to leave. He resisted at first. Said we could fix this. That he loved me. I told him love didn't look like exploitation dressed up as intimacy. He left eventually, shoulders tense, dignity fractured. That night, I sat with my mother in the living room, the television off, the house heavy with aftermath. She told me she was sorry. I didn't know how to forgive her yet. But I understood her better than I ever had. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong again. Because there was still one truth Marcus hadn't told me. One decision he had already made. And it would change everything. Marcus didn't disappear after that night. He stayed gone just long enough for me to believe I had regained control. 3 days passed. Then 4. The house settled into a tense routine. My mother moved quietly, deliberately. Naomi barely spoke, existing like someone bracing for an aftershock she knew was coming. I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning something unfinished. Something fragile. I told myself I was waiting for clarity. What I was really waiting for was the last lie to surface. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, folded neatly inside an envelope with my name written in Marcus's familiar handwriting. The return address was our apartment. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of documents. Bank statements. Lease agreements. Emails printed carefully, highlighted in places Marcus must have thought would soften the blow. They didn't. The truth unfolded slowly, methodically, like a confession designed to feel reasonable. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had been preparing to leave. 4 months. He had transferred money from our joint accounts into a separate one I had never known about. He had secured a new apartment across town, leased under a friend's name. He had adjusted his work schedule, his habits, his entire life with surgical precision. And Naomi wasn't the destination. She was the bridge. The emails made that clear. Conversations with a woman whose name I didn't recognize at first. Not Naomi. Not anyone from work. Someone new. Someone younger. Someone unconnected to my past. Someone he planned to start over with. Naomi had never been the endgame. She had been a test. A way to prove to himself that he still had power. That he could fracture what I came from before he walked away from what I built. The realization hollowed me out. I read the final email twice. The one where he explained everything in his careful, controlled tone. He wrote that he loved me once, genuinely. That he didn't know how to carry the weight of my family's trauma. That being close to Naomi made him realize how damaged we all were. He wrote that he deserved peace. That sentence did something irreversible to me. That evening, I asked Naomi to sit with me. She looked fragile, like someone already broken by truths she hadn't earned. I didn't show her the papers. I didn't need to. I told her Marcus was leaving. For good. For someone else. Her face crumpled in a way that wasn't dramatic, just devastated. She asked me if that meant it had all been for nothing. I told her no. It meant it had never been about her at all. That was the moment something shifted between us. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. The next morning, I left. Not in anger. Not in shame. In clarity. I packed my suitcase fully this time. Hugged my mother longer than I ever had before. She whispered apologies I wasn't ready to answer. Naomi stood in the doorway, eyes red, watching me go like someone watching a storm pass that had already destroyed too much. Back in my apartment, the silence felt different. Cleaner. Honest. Marcus wasn't there. I changed the locks that afternoon. I didn't cry when I signed the separation papers. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for explanations that would only re-traumatize me. Instead, I walked through the rooms we had shared and noticed how small they felt without my denial filling the space. I realized something then. The greatest betrayal wasn't the affair. It was the way I had been trained, from childhood, to accept discomfort as love. To confuse endurance with loyalty. To mistake silence for safety. Marcus hadn't created that wound. He had recognized it. And tried to use it. Months later, my life looked nothing like the one I had planned. I lived alone. I slept deeply. I spoke honestly. Naomi started therapy. My mother learned how to sit with truths she once buried. We didn't become a perfect family. But we became a real one. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about Marcus. Not with longing. With clarity. He had mistaken my quiet strength for weakness. He had mistaken my history for permission. And in doing so, he lost access to the woman I became when I stopped surviving and started choosing. I was raised in silence. But I refused to live there anymore.